Floyd and Manny are a reality, but how did we actually get here? We are making the rounds right here on ESPN.com. I'm Jim Baswell. They step in the ring on May 2nd in a mega fight that for a long time was thought of as a long shot at best. ESPN boxing insider Dan Rafael has a story on this exact subject. Dan, you had a chance to talk with people from CBS, Showtime, and HBO, as well as promoters, trainers, and fellow fighters. So how did this dream matchup ultimately become a reality?
Oh, Jim, it was not easy. There was a lot of ups and downs. There was a lot of important meetings throughout this whole saga. If you really want to pinpoint a point when it began, you have to go back almost a year ago, last spring, when Leslie Moonves, who was the president and chief executive of CBS Corporation, which is the parent company of Showtime, and therefore the people that have Floyd Mayweather under contract for 2 more fights at like $30+ million a fight, with numbers that have been falling in the pay-per-view realm, he wanted to make this fight. What I found interesting when I spoke to Leslie Moonves about this is, yes, of course, he admitted there's a big business interest to wanting to make this fight because it's going to gross crazy amounts of money and break all kinds of records on pay-per-view. But he is a boxing fan. He grew up a boxing fan. He told me about how his favorite fighter growing up in the 60s as a kid was Floyd Patterson, how he was a huge Marvin Hagler fan in the 1980s. This is not a guy that's Johnny-come-lately. He's been a devout boxing fan his entire life. Now he's in his mid-60s. So he wanted to get this fight done, not just for business, but just because he wanted to see the fight as a fan. And he's got a lot of experience negotiating tough deals. And I believe that after all the discussions I've had with different people around this fight, he and his presence in this negotiation, he is the linchpin of why it's happening. That's what people on both sides of the deal say. They give Leslie Moonves from CBS most of the credit for being the person to keep this thing on track. And I think that's the reason why we're going to see this big-time fight on May 2nd.
Thank God for him, Dan. Dan, we've spoken so often about how the relationship between Floyd and Bob Arum was a roadblock that would always get in the way. How did they get past that?
Well, you're right about that. That was tough. And not only was it the relationship between, or the non-relationship, I should say, between Floyd and Bob Arum, you could say the same thing about the relationship between Bob and Al Heyman, who was Floyd Mayweather's advisor. There was a lot of animosity there. I guess what really came down to is, again, Leslie Moonves, who has got a good relationship with Al Heyman. They've done a lot of business over the last couple of years with each other, particularly on the Mayweather agreement. But he also has been friends with Bob Arum for many years, to the extent where they actually had vacations together. And even though they weren't at the best place when this negotiation started because of a previous issue on a Pacquiao fight where Leslie Moonves felt like Bob was not totally straight with him when they did the Shane Mosley fight a few years ago, the point was, they patched up their relationship, and here you have Leslie Moonves was a good relationship with Arum, a good relationship with Heyman, and he was able to get them to deal with each other. He dealt with each one of them individually to get to certain issues. But it got to a point where, of course, to close the deal, you're going to have to get them in a room together to hash out some of the big issues and make sure you're on the same page. He arranged a meeting between the two of them at his house in Beverly Hills that took place late last year, and they came together in that meeting, and what Leslie Moonves told me and Bob Arum told me, Heyman doesn't speak to the press, but they told me it was a very productive and significant meeting where they were able to basically get most of the major issues either totally agreed to or to the point where they knew they'd be able to work it out. And they were able to get past that, and Mayweather, for his part, had to finally understand if he was going to have this fight with Manny Pacquiao, Bob Arum was going to be involved, period. He is Manny's promoter. He signed to him through the end of 2016. So it was either Arum's involved or there's no fight, and he had no choice.
How about what we saw publicly? We remember recently the two men, Floyd and Manny, speaking at a Miami Heat game. How much did that conversation play a role in where we are today?
It was important. The people that are involved in the fight, they will say this. That was significant. It didn't make the fight happen, but what it did was it gave both Manny and Floyd the understanding that face-to-face they knew each guy was serious about trying to make this fight. And so, as it's been described to me specifically by Steven Espinoza from Showtime, that meeting, while it didn't make the fight, it sort of greased the wheels and got things in a right spot where not too far after that meeting they were able to close the deal. Bob Arum, for his part, told me that all the stuff he had done prior to that, the meetings with Moonves, the meeting with Heyman, the back and forth with the networks, all the different things, he only finally truly believed that this fight was going to get finalized when he knew about the meeting between Mayweather and Pacquiao's advisor, Michael Kahn, in the hotel suite in Miami after the ball game. At that point, he said that's the first time when they met each other and they both said they wanted to get it done. That's the first time he believed that the deal would finally get made, and a couple of weeks later it was announced.
ESPN boxing insider Dan Rafael on the details of how the mega fight that is Floyd and Manny ultimately became a reality. I encourage you to read his column here on ESPN.com. We are making the rounds right here on the boxing page. For Dan Rafael, I'm Jim Basswell.